Proximity by Great 78. Chapter 5. Jealousy. Monday, 2 August 2010. Things were rather tense the following Monday when Draco arrived for work, just as he fully expected they would be. It wasn't every day that one went around snogging their former enemies, who were also their current Auror colleagues, in dark alleys. Granger was as unfailingly polite as always, but she rebuffed every attempt he made to speak with her alone. At the Monday morning meeting, when he chose a seat next to hers, she found an excuse to move to Potter's other side, claiming that there was a draught in the windowless room. When the group of them took a tea break around 11, she elected to visit her old friend Alicia in magical games and sports, instead of joining them in the cafeteria. Late in the afternoon, when the two of them were scheduled to interview a witness in the diamond heist, Granger begged off, saying she had a headache. Draco was forced to interview the woman with Weasley, who provided a running internal monologue detailing exactly how large Weasley thought the woman's nipples might be. When they returned to the office, Granger and Potter were gone, likely working on something together elsewhere. This meant that he and Weasley were alone. But at least without the presence of any women, Weasley's thoughts would stay mostly tame, Draco reassured himself. Except that he was wrong. They'd been working in blissful silence for a few minutes, when Weasley got up and searched Granger's desk for a missing file. This seemed to remind the man of her absence, much to Draco's remorse. Devon Malmerd walked into Rod Wellbuilt's office, finding the brawnier man, with his face buried between the high, perfectly round globes of Persephone's ass. Draco's quill broke in his suddenly clenched fist, and his fingertips came up to rake angrily through his perfectly coiffed hair. He thought the weasel had killed off Draco's character already, but apparently the unfortunate Malmerd was back.
"Oh, Mr. Wellbuilt, Durwood is here,"
the Nabal witch said worriedly. Persephone grabbed in vain at the cardigan she wore, trying uselessly to button it closed over her heaving, swollen bosoms. Durwood hesitated near the door, drooling at the sight of the witch being eaten out from behind. Wellbuilt used his large fingers to splay the cheeks of her ass for one more solid lick from clit to hole, before smacking one cheek firmly. It left a bright red imprint of his oversized hand, a souvenir for the witch to take home and remember him by. He pulled up the lacy pink knickers that had stretched wide at Persephone's ankles, snapping the bits of lacy silk back into place with a pop. He rucked down her tiny skirt to cover her ass, pink from both the fabric and his enthusiastic endeavors. Then he reached between her legs for one last friendly pinch of her clit, before sending her on her way with a hurried, "That'll be all, Persephone." When the two wizards were alone, the mousy blonde man cleaned the drool from his chin before saying to the broad-shouldered Mr. Wellbuilt, "Gosh, sir, I don't know how you have the stamina to keep a witch like that satisfied. I don't think I could make her happy if I had the unit to even try." "Well, Donovan, it's all about keeping her wanting more. That and having a huge cock, of course." Donovan looked sad. "Well, I guess there goes my chance with a beautiful girl like that." In his outraged anger, Draco had apparently used a sticking charm to subdue a flutter of inter-office memos in his in-tray. He huffed and cancelled the charm, struggling to keep his anger under control. After several deep breaths, he managed to speak. "Weasley, how's your book coming?" he asked between gritted teeth. The ginger looked up shiftily. Pretty good. I actually haven't written much down, but I've been, composing it in my head, you might say. I have a pretty good memory, so one of these days I'll sit down and write it all out."
Draco nodded, as if this idea were both perfectly reasonable and an actual thing that would happen. It was likely neither of those. Ron Weasley would never take the chance of his wife finding such a manuscript, he was certain, and the wizard would be fired outright if a document like this were discovered in his office desk. He decided to needle the ginger a bit.
"What does your wife think about you writing a novel?" She's supportive of it," Weasley said. "There's no chance in hell I'm telling Lav that I'm writing a novel," the man's thoughts said inside Draco's head. "Godric, she would take so much ever-loving piss out on me." "Does she help you work out the plot? Next time I see her, I'll have to ask how it's going. Maybe she can give us some hints about your story, since you've been so tight-lipped about it," Draco suggested, smirking as the man's panic was immediately evident in both his thoughts and on his face. No. She just has a vague idea that I'm writing it. I haven't shared any of it with her yet. I want it to be a surprise. Besides, she's rather preoccupied now anyway, since Angelina told everyone yesterday at dinner about the baby." The two wizards lapsed into silence as each of them worked separately, both preoccupied by their own thoughts. Draco sifted through his memory, trying to remember which one Angelina was married to. He thought it was either the twin that survived or the one that worked upstairs with Kingsley Shacklebolt in the minister's office. Mentally, he flipped a coin and decided upon the twin. "How is your brother? The one that was on the Quidditch team with you at Hogwarts, I mean," Draco asked. Weasley shot him an odd look. "George? He's fine. In fact, he and his wife told everyone yesterday that they were expecting a baby." "That's excellent news. Is it their first?" "Third. They've had 2 little girls so far, ages 5 and 2. Mom thinks it'll be twins this time, though," Weasley said with a grimace. "Heaven help us all if it is, though. Lav spent all night crying as it was. If it's twins, I might never hear the end of it." Draco, who thought the idea of caring for 4 children under the age of 6 sounded like actual hell on earth, looked sharply at the weasel. "That's exciting news. Is Lavender excited to become an aunt again?" Yeah, she is," Weasley said. "Say, did Harry leave a note on his desk saying when they'd be back?" Draco glanced over at Potter's desk, which was slightly closer to him than it was to Weasley. "No." Silence reigned once more for several minutes as the two of them worked. Then after another minute or so, the weasel's thoughts began to drift once more, wafting their way into Draco's mind. 8 years. Married for 8 years, and she's not pregnant yet. Bloody hell. Maybe Lav is right. Maybe it is me. I thought she might turn green with envy when they told us last night. Damn it. Why did George have to pork his wife without the contraception charm? Feels like they're just flaunting it at this point. Godric's ass. They aren't even the worst. Bill and Fleur are expecting their 5th. Draco shuddered. At least that was a fate that he wouldn't have to live. Astoria Greengrass looked like the kind of witch who would barely be able to handle 1 pregnancy, much less multiple ones, which sent an odd sadness stabbing through his brain that he shoved roughly into a corner of his mind to ignore at all costs. Weasley's thoughts were on a hot streak, now that the idea of his own shortcomings had surfaced. Thank Merlin I married a woman, so at least there's a chance we actually managed to make a baby, Weasley's voice said inside his head. Could be worse. I could be like Charlie. Draco frowned, searching his memory once more before asking in annoyance, "Exactly how many brothers do you have, Weasley?" The Gryffindor shot him an ugly look as he answered, "There's 7 of us. I have 5 brothers and a sister, although now, of course, it's just 4 brothers." There was a brief wave of wordless grief that flooded Draco's mind, and in spite of his general distaste for Weasley, he felt sympathy for the man's loss. Draco had been no fan of the Weasleys during their time together at Hogwarts, that was true, but even he had to admit
The twins were always good value when it came to coming up with a load of fuckery and tomfoolery. Right. There's the twin that owns the shop, and, your brother at the bank, and the one upstairs in the minister's office. Who's the fourth again? That's Charlie. He works for dragons in Romania, Weasley said, suddenly highly focused on the report in front of him. Charlie, that's right. He's married, I take it? Draco grinned at the thought of one of Weasley's brothers being stuck listening to the musings of dragons running through his brain. Yes, he's been married a handful of years. He and, Stephanie, they don't have children. An image of a pregnant man popped into Draco's head, courtesy of the weasel. Wonder what Stephen would even look like pregnant, the ginger mused. Draco said nothing, and the lift dinged open, expelling Potter and Granger. The witch was flushed with laughter, and Draco could not help but think how beautiful she looked, her cheeks pink, and her hair flying wildly as she giggled with one of her best friends. Weasley turned to look at them, and Draco was assaulted by the sudden and overwhelming desire from the man for the witch. Fuck, her tits look amazing in that dress.
Rod Well-built's cock thrust up hard into Persephone as she straddled him in her office chair, her amazing tits bouncing joyously between them.
Weasley! Draco practically yelled. The ginger man's blue eyes flashed angrily at him as the image of the bouncing tits faded away in both of their minds. What do you need, Malfoy? Are you done with that report? I need to add my notes. Wordlessly, Weasley tossed the report in the direction of Draco's desk. Trying for a jovial air, but falling a little short, Weasley looked back at the other two. What's so funny, you two? Draco, having not actually needed the report at all, looked up as well. He caught Granger's copper eyes staring at him, an almost hungry expression on her face, that she quickly masked as soon as his silver eyes met hers. Harry was just telling me about something James did the other day, the witch said, making her way to her own desk and avoiding Draco's stare. Of course, Mum's golden grandbaby. To be expected, I guess. The chosen one, and the princess made him, so of course he is. These words leapt to Draco's brain, and for the first time he realized exactly how jealous Weasley was of his best mate. Potter had married the Weasley's sister, the only girl, so of course the two of them were likely Mother Weasley's favourites. Draco felt a tiny twinge of sympathy for the man that was immediately wiped out when another image of Rod Well-built pumping his dick in and out of Granger's ass filled his head. Draco needed to get away from this man before he bludgeoned the other wizard to death with a chair. Granger, can you show me your notes on that Brighton case? He asked. Sure, let me see. The witch leaned over to dig into a low drawer of her desk, and Draco immediately noticed the lovely constellation of freckles that spanned the creamy expanse of the tops of her boobs. His fingers itched to trace the constellations he found there. He flicked his eyes to Weasley to see that the other man was focused on the exact same sight. Draco cringed, wondering if the thought he'd just had been his own or the Ginger's. Granger plopped the file upon her desk, which was already covered with more of the same. Granger, let's go somewhere neater so that this won't get mixed up with the other files. Conference room 4, he offered. She hesitated, though Draco could see that she could come up with no good reason why this wasn't a good idea. Wordlessly, she led the way, and he followed, appreciatively noticing the way her hips swayed in the green pencil skirt she wore. Once the door was locked, Draco wondrously flipped the blinds in the room to shield them from view. "Why did you do that, Malfoy?" she asked warily, standing at the corner of the conference table. Draco gave her his best disarming smile. "Well, you've been avoiding me all morning. I thought maybe if we had a moment of privacy." "You'd what? Try to take advantage of me again?" She lifted one brow at him, one hand going lightly to her necklace, twisting the Gordian knot between her fingers. His eyes went huge as he backed up a step, Hermione, if you felt that I took advantage of you, I am greatly sorry. I assure you I meant nothing of the sort." She heaved a sigh. "It's all right, Malfoy. You didn't take advantage. If anything, I'm just trying to make myself feel better about the whole thing. Come on, take a look at these files." She opened the folder on the top of the huge conference table, but did not move Draco's way. He took this as an invitation to move closer, coming to stand directly next to her as the two of them looked down at the file. Draco stared down without seeing the report in front of him. Finally he asked, "Exactly what do you need to feel better regarding the other night? Is there anything I could have done differently?" She gave a low groan of resignation, her fingers dropping the necklace back down to her chest. "Godric, so we're talking about this. All right. No, in answer to your question, there's nothing you could have done differently. You were an all-around perfect gentleman, which I must say was a bit of a surprise, considering your reputation. Hermione, I would never wish to do anything that wasn't what you wanted as well." Granger smiled. "That's good to know. The thing is, what you said about the fan club, Salazar's ass. I knew that was corny when it came out. I promise. I was just nervous. I won't say anything stupid like that again," he said urgently, lifting one hand to cup her elbow and turn her gently towards him. "It wasn't that," she laughed, her own hand coming up from the file on the table to rest on his hip. "It just reminded me of something we talked about earlier that night." He frowned. "What was it?" "It was nothing." Shaking her head, she smiled up at him, and every thought and concern that had lingered in his mind was suddenly swept away. He lowered his lips to hers, catching her pout with his, sucking her lower lip between his teeth, even as both her arms came around him to pull him closer. "God, Draco," she moaned, and his hands travelled down to her ass, cupping it as he picked up her slight frame, turning them both just a bit so that she could sit on the table. Within seconds they'd worked together to unbutton her blouse, and he was pushing the fabric of her blouse and bra out of his way greedily as his mouth worked down her body. His hands cupped her beautiful breasts together, and his tongue worked between the two of them, drawing a slick line in the slit they made. His mouth worked one nipple free of its lace enclosure, and his tongue and teeth grazed over the dusky pink bud, even as his thumb did the same to the other. Inside his trousers, his cock was beginning to strain against his zipper. Granger keened, arching her back to push her breasts against him, and he laid her down gently on the table, non-verbally casting a wandless cushioning charm underneath the witch as he did so. Now his mouth continued southward, down her body. One hand remained at her top, continuing teasing the tips of her breasts, while the other reached for her thighs, parting them and rucking up her green pencil skirt to find a lovely pair of ivory, thank Merlin, not pink, knickers beneath them. The gusset was damp with her arousal, and Draco breathed in raggedly. He wanted to bathe in the scent. The doorknob rattled. "You two done with that file?" Weasley's grating voice called through the door. Even from this distance, with his mind already entirely full, the Ginger Git's thoughts managed to get through to Draco. "What the absolute fuck are the two of them doing in there, with the window blinds drawn and the door locked?" Weasley fretted. Draco smiled against the witch's thigh, even as she struggled to sit up and push down her skirt frantically. "Exactly what you think we're doing, Weasley," he thought to himself. "Fuck, fuck, fuck," Granger whispered to herself, reaching inside the cups of her bra to lift first one, then the other breast back into position inside the ivory silk and lace. Draco watched the subconscious movement hungrily, committing it to memory. With a deft move, he tucked his slowly softening cock down so that it wasn't immediately obvious. "Granger, it's all right. We're just looking at a file, remember?" he said, blasting a cooling charm from his wand tip, first at himself and then at her. She smiled gratefully, even as she asked, "With the door locked, and the blinds drawn?" Draco nodded. "It's a sensitive case, so we don't want any leaks, especially since we're closing in on the perpetrator." "That's true." She pointed her wand at her blouse, and the buttons did themselves up, all at once. "Do I look all right? Did I miss anything?" He stared at her, his eyes trying to drink in every detail of the gorgeous witch, knowing exactly how much arousal there was dripping from her knickers at this very moment. The thought had him half-hard still. "You look beautiful." There was an awkward silence for a couple of seconds as she blushed and looked away, rushing for the door to pull it open. "Ron! Sorry about that. It's a sensitive case, you know. We didn't want anyone to be able to just walk in before we could put everything away into the secure file."
"Right."
The Weasleys' beady eyes were ping-ponging back and forth between the two of them suspiciously.
"Right. That makes sense. Hermione, you missed a spot on your lipstick."
"Oh, thank you. I must have messed it up at lunch," the witch offered smoothly, sidestepping to avoid a second swipe of Weasley's fingers.
"Exactly. That's what I figured,"
the weasel said, cutting his eyes over to Draco. For once, there were no words within Weasley's and therefore Draco's head. There was only white-hot rage and bitter, sharp-edged jealousy. Tuesday, 3 August, 2010. Draco waited the customary 3 days after their date to message Astoria. On Tuesday morning before work, even as the memory from the day before of Granger lifting her breasts into the cups of her bra played on a never-ending loop inside his head, Draco pinned a quick note to the blonde witch. His words had been positive and friendly, even if his actual feelings behind the note were a bit stilted. "Astoria, I had a lovely time at dinner with you the other night. If you have another night free, soon perhaps we can get together again. I'll await your owl. Warmest regards, Draco." To his surprise, she did not wait even a full day to write back. When he arrived home Tuesday afternoon from work, his owl Thorn had already brought him back her reply, dropping it on the desk in his study inside his London flat. "Draco, I had a wonderful time as well. It would be great to get together again. I'm free tomorrow night. Best regards, Astoria." He quelled a sigh of resignation that threatened to escape him. After their interrupted meeting Monday afternoon, Granger had not allowed herself to take any more private meetings with him today. It wasn't as though he had a better offer for Wednesday night, he reasoned. Picking up a quill, Draco dipped it in ink before scratching off a reply onto thick parchment paper. "Astoria, that sounds perfect. If you'd like, my elf can cook for us here in my flat. 7 o'clock. 1468 Laystall Street, London. Highest regards, Draco." He sealed the letter and moved towards his owl, Thorn. The beast instantly took flight in an angry squawk, his wet wings flapping in protest. He flew to the chandelier in the room, perching upon it and staring down at Draco with a look that told the wizard that there was no way on God's green earth that the owl was going back out there this evening. Looking at the rain lashing the nearby window, Draco understood why. Striding to the flue, he tossed the letter into green flames, calling out the destination. Letters via flue weren't as secure and mistake-proof as by owl, but it was faster, and, judging by Thorn's attitude, this letter would not have made it to Astoria anyway. By the time he was showered, Thorn was asleep in his cage down the corridor, and there was a reply letter waiting for him on the hearthrug. "Draco, I look forward to it. Sweetest regards, Astoria." Draco let out a sigh. "Pym." The elf appeared with a pop. "What can Pym do for Master Draco?" "We will be hosting Astoria Greengrass for dinner here tomorrow night. Please ensure the flat is spotless, and come up with a menu. Doesn't matter to me. Wellington, venison, your choice. Whatever is fine."
The elf bowed. "Yes, Master Draco." He raised his hand to snap his fingers and disappear, but Draco stayed him with a lift of his own hand.
"Be certain all the things in my bedside table are well hidden, please, Pym."
Draco was no stranger to entertaining women in his bed, and the wide variety of toys and random apparatuses might very well send an upstanding witch like Astoria into flabbergasted shock if she decided to go snooping whilst she was here. Wednesday, 4 August 2010. It was another torturous workday, with the voice of Ronald Weasley stabbing through his brain. Lavender Weasley sounded voraciously jealous of her varied sisters-in-law, who seemed to come down with the particular affliction of pregnancy any time their virile Weasley so much as politely coughed in the general direction of their uteruses. Ronald's wife was convinced that her particular weasel was infertile, and so a great deal of the wizard's idle thoughts in the last week or so were preoccupied by thoughts and topics like sperm counts, something called motility, and the upcoming mortification of jizzing into a cup later that same day, for whatever reason. Draco was subjected to numerous imagined versions of how badly this could go wrong for Weasley, the majority of which were equal parts horrifying and amusing to Draco. After their heated tryst in the conference room on Monday, Granger had given him unwanted space. She was unfailingly polite, but always had an excuse to avoid being alone with him. The one thing Draco wished to avoid, but seemed unable to, was the continual onslaught of Ronald Weasley's poorly constructed dialogue and narration between Rod Wellbuilt and Persephone Grammar. Now, apparently the detective and his fuck toy were on assignment in some sort of Muggle-style resort in the Mediterranean. This resort seemed to not have a dress code, as Persephone spent the great majority of her time walking around topless. It was a common daydream for the hapless Rod to bend the flexible witch over a dinner table in the middle of an expensive restaurant surrounded by interested onlookers. In some of Weasley's fantasies, he held the witch face down by the scruff of her neck as he forced his cock roughly between her legs, seeming to enjoy her cries and the squelching sound of her wet pussy as it took his length. More than once in this scenario, Wellbuilt would emphasize his thrusts by grunting things like, "Wipe that git from your silly little head." Several times that day, Draco had to excuse himself to the toilet, simply standing in place to enjoy a bit of silence and peace within his own mind. How was Weasley able to justify these fantasies within his own mind? Salazar's sack, the man had a wife at home, into whom he was trying to plant his seed. Did the sanctity of marriage mean nothing to this man? But, staring at himself in the washroom mirror, Draco's eyes suddenly widened with shock. He would likely be married soon as well, and whatever witch he chose, she could not be Hermione Granger. In a few months' time, he might be the married man having these sorts of fantasies, that beautiful witch stretched out over a table, whilst he had his salacious way with her. These fantasies, they were the sorts he'd indulged in for months. No, years, if he were being honest with himself. They were built upon tiny things, a long glance from the witch, or their hands accidentally brushing, a shared dance at a ministry gala, or a smirk from Granger when discussing a particularly titillating case. Their thighs pressed against each other's on a bench at the Leaky when their table grew too crowded for extra space. For so long, he'd been able to mostly ignore these thoughts at work, pushing them aside until he had a moment alone at home to examine them at his leisure. He would not deny that he often entertained thoughts of this witch in his mind as he stroked his cock at night, those nights when he was alone in bed.
Sod it all. There had been times that he had indulged in these daydreams, even when he wasn't alone. Plenty of witches that had graced his bed had often only played the role of placeholder, after all. But all of that would be different in a very short time. Soon he would never be alone at night in bed. His fantasies of Granger would be relegated to quick daydreams at his desk and shameful moments in the shower or toilet. And all the while, his own wife would be the one waiting for him at home, barely willing and able to keep his bed warm. Fuck, could he really do this? Could he marry someone for whom he had hardly any feelings? Back in the bullpen, with his 3 fellow Aurors, he was immediately confronted by a vivid image in his mind, courtesy of the disgusting weasel. The buffoon Rod Wellbuilt now had the well-endowed witch lying with her back on the buffet table, full of food. 2 Muggle servers were holding the witch's ankles as far apart as possible, whilst Wellbuilt drilled a cock the size of a man's forearm into her cunt roughly. Occasionally, this fictionally muscular version of Weasley would reach for a food item lying nearby the witch, scarfing it down, but never faltering in his rhythm as he pounded into her. Beneath the weasel's desk, the real Weasley tapped his heel with each imagined thrust. Draco gritted his teeth and surreptitiously aimed his wand at the ginger man. A non-verbal stinging jinx to the back of one of the man's knees sliced through the image in his brain, for which Draco was extremely grateful. "Ow! Oh, bloody hell! I think we have some sort of bug loose in here. Something just bit me!" Weasley slapped futilely at his trouser leg, as though to dislodge the biting beast. "That's odd. Perhaps you should stop eating at your desk, Weasley. It's attracting vermin," Draco said, with a pointed glare at the man. Weasley shot him his own ugly look, but Granger made a sound of agreement. "He's right, Ron. We should do a better job cleaning up after ourselves, and not just leave a mess for the Ministry elves to take care of. They were off last weekend. You left half a sausage roll on your desk all weekend." The wizard muttered something about planning to come back for it, but Granger only looked at Draco, the corners of her lips lifting as though daring him to laugh. He smiled warmly back at her. His mind was flooded by Weasley's voice. "Get your filthy fucking pureblood eyes off her, Pratt. She doesn't like you." For good measure, Draco sent the witch a little wink, causing her smile to broaden. Draco had the feeling that, like many things in his life, Weasley was wrong about that one as well. Dinner that night was pleasant enough, though Astoria seemed far more nervous than she had at Mystic. Perhaps she was aware that Draco was the sort of wizard with whom a second date was a rarity. "Your flat is lovely," she remarked, dabbing at the corners of her mouth with her white linen napkin. "Do you like it better than living at the manor?" "I do. A lot less oversight," he smirked. Astoria smiled back at him. "That must be nice. Mother insists that I live with her until I'm properly betrothed. It's really no wonder Daphne got married as soon as she did." Astoria smiled thinly. "Is marriage something you foresee for yourself?" Draco asked suddenly. It only just occurred to him that he had no idea if the witch actually wanted to be married. She sighed. "Yes, of course. I mean, in our position, it's pretty much a given," she said, looking more than a little sad. He nodded, his own morose thoughts on the subject creeping in. Still, as the witch implied, it was necessary. He should try his hardest to make the best of it. "I don't mean to come off as overly forward, Tory, but you should know that I am pursuing marriage as well. If you are open to entertaining the possibility, I'd like to keep that option on the table." She nodded without meeting his eyes. Yes, of course." "Well, lovely," he offered, happy to have that bit of awkwardness behind them, even as his words ushered in a new level of uncomfortability between them. Astoria glanced up and then away again, her eyes seeming to almost brim with tears. "Would you excuse me? Where's your powder room?" "Fourth door, on the right. I can have Pym show you if—" "That's all right. I'll find it," she said, standing quickly. Draco rose to his feet as well as she skittered off down the corridor, towards the washroom. Once she was out of sight, Draco dropped back to his chair, picking up his fork to toy with the beef Wellington that Pym had prepared perfectly. 2 dates in, and already this witch was nearly in tears, apparently at the thought of marrying him. Or was it marriage in general? He was unsure, and felt it his obligation to at least ask when she returned. 20 minutes later, however, there was no sign of the witch. Growing worried, Draco stood and tiptoed down the corridor, looking into each door to see if perhaps she'd gotten lost amongst the various rooms. He found the washroom door to which he'd directed her standing open, the room empty. "Tori," he called softly, wondering why he felt the need to sneak around in his own flat, but mindful of scaring the witch all the same. "In here," came a tight voice. He pushed open the door to his own master suite, sumptuously decorated in rich navy blue velvet bed hangings and soft white Egyptian cotton bedding. There, in the centre of his bed, lay Astoria Greengrass. She was as stiff as a board, staring up at the ceiling with her hands gripping each other nervously on her stomach. Her lingerie set of pink clung to her small breasts, held snugly within the sheer fabric, her nipples artfully hidden by scraps of lace. The same lace encircled her waist with elastic garters, running down the front of each smooth white thigh, holding up the sheer stockings she wore. Under the garter belt was a matching pink thong, the ribbon that made it up arranged precisely over the slit of her pussy to reveal its clean-shaven smoothness. He stood still for longer than he should have, uncertain what to say. Astoria." Her icy blue eyes flicked to him, then just as quickly bounced away. "Yes, Draco." "Not that I don't enjoy it when a woman decides to forego dessert and skip straight to sex, but, did I miss something?" Thank you for listening to Proximity by Great78. If you enjoyed this story and would like to listen to more, please subscribe to my podcast, Silver and Copper, on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find a link for this story in the show description or search Archive of Our Own for Great78.